The French philosopher Albert Camus, in his essay The Myth of Sisyphus, stated that there is but one truly serious philosophical question, and that is whether or not life is worth living. However, secondary to that, I believe that the most important question that any of us will have to answer during our temporary temporal existence is how best to live the life that we have. That is to answer the question of how to be a good person. Humanity has searched for the answer to that question since we have been able to communicate, but so far, we have uncovered no single, clear solution. We have been left, abandoned even, to our own insufficient intellectual devices, to fumble our way through the darkness of morality in the hopes that at the end of it all, we will find that one illuminating answer. An answer I fear will always remain hidden from us.
But in D&D, we have that answer. D&D provides us with an objective definition of good and evil, as well as a scale by which we can judge the morality of our characters' actions in the game. What impact does such a system have on the world of the game? And how does it interact with our own real-world moral theories? Over the next couple of videos, I'm going to be breaking out the philosophy books and breaking down the alignment system of Dungeons & Dragons and deep diving into morality in Dungeons & Dragons. Because I just finished The Good Place and I want to put my philosophy major to good use for once in my life. This video is mainly going to be about the alignment system and how our real-world moral theories can be used to inform our understanding of it, which can lead to more nuanced characters at the table, better roleplay, and more engaging ethical dilemmas that the DM can pose to the characters and the players. Our next video is going to be taking more of a meta look at the impact of having the alignment system as a part of the cosmology of the D&D world has on said world. It answers questions like, can immortals like angels and demons have free will? Can they ever break the nature of the alignment they are born into? And while exploring these ideas may seem needlessly complicated and really esoteric for a D&D video, an understanding of moral theory can help alleviate player versus player tension, as well as character versus character tension, and better set everyone's expectations from the get-go of how this world is going to react to the actions that you take. And an understanding of moral theories allows you to create more nuanced and interesting ethical quandaries that can truly challenge the soul of a character and the player that is playing them, and make that player question every decision they have made and whether their own personal conception of good is truly actually good. They have to face the hard consequences of their actions and who they are as a person. Because that's what everyone wants from D&D, right? Oh god, I'm just now realizing what a tiny subset of people this video is going to appeal to. Let's start with the very basics to make sure we're all on the same page. Everyone knows what is at the center of D&D's conception of morality: the alignment chart. It is a chart of 9 moral categories that are supposedly meant to represent the archetypal decisions that your character will make. Read from left to right, it goes from law to chaos, and from top to bottom, it goes from good to evil. And each of the 9 categories is some combination of these 4 values. And this alignment chart, whether you love it or hate it, is nonetheless a foundational part of Dungeons & Dragons. 5th edition has done away with a lot of the mechanical references to it, like there's no more detect alignment spell, classes are no longer restricted by alignment, but nonetheless, it is still integral to not only D&D's legacy, but more importantly, its foundational cosmology. I won't get too much into this now because it's more a topic for the second video, but the alignments in D&D aren't just some moral system that everyone in the universe suddenly decided they wanted to start obeying. They're used because in the multiverse of D&D, they are representative of the outer planes of the Great Wheel alignment, which means that there are planes of existence, entire universes that embody these cosmic ideas of morality. Which means that morality must be some sort of property, some physical, tangible thing even. There must be some way for the cosmos, the multiverse, to be able to distinguish between what actions are good and what actions are evil, which means it must have an objective definition innate to it. And that fundamentally changes how we look at morality. And understandably, a lot of people take issue with this because moral dilemmas are all about the grey area. They're all about people questioning whether or not their actions they are taking are truly good, trying to make the best of potentially a no-win situation. But if you've got objective definitions of good and evil, where's the debate? Why wouldn't you just do the good thing? Having these objective definitions on the surface kind of says a big fuck you to the entire branch of moral philosophy.
How do I put this delicately? It's all stupid garbage.
But of course, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't more nuanced than that. So let's take a look at what D&D's definitions of good and evil are. The first definition we're going to look at is D&D creative designer Mike Mearls' interpretation in 5th edition. Mearls says that an evil character is selfish to the detriment of others. A neutral character is selfish but tries their best not to harm others. A good character is selfless and tries to help others. A more detailed definition is given in the 3rd edition Player's Handbook, which says, good implies altruism, respect for life, and a concern for the dignity of sentient beings. Good characters make personal sacrifices to help others. Evil implies harming, oppressing, and killing others. Some evil creatures simply have no compassion for others and kill without qualms if doing so is convenient or can be set up. Others actively pursue evil, killing for sport or out of duty to some malevolent deity or master. In my opinion, both those definitions are fairly uncontroversial about what good and being a good person is. They kind of just match up with what we think a good person is in our world. What they don't do is give you any sort of grounded understanding of how to act as a good person. Say for example, your character is walking through a market and they spy a merchant with a lot of fruit, and I mean a lot of fruit. There is no way that they're going to be able to sell this much fruit for the remainder of the day. And that fruit looks pretty close to being off. Like, they're not going to be able to sell it tomorrow. So they've got this excess of fruit and you are starving, like really ravenous. You don't have any gold to pay for it though. Is it morally right to steal some of the fruit that is about to go off to feed yourself? The merchant isn't going to miss it. It's about to go off and he's not going to sell it anyway. You're basically weighing up two aspects of the definition of good. The dignity of other sentient creatures, by stealing from them you are injuring or harming that dignity, or your desire to preserve life, which is also a good ideal. What if instead of stealing the fruit for yourself, you were stealing it for a starving orphan? Then you are doing a purely altruistic act that you gain nothing from. What then? As I said, a moral theory needs to be able to guide you in these kinds of situations, and our objective definitions of good and evil don't do that currently. Clearly we're missing something, and that something is the horizontal axis of the alignment chart, law and chaos. Those values ground our ideas of good and evil into actual actions that we can then turn into workable moral theories. Moral philosophy is broken into 3 branches: ethics, meta-ethics, and normative ethics. And today we're really just going to be looking at normative ethics because that answers the question of what we ought to do or how to be a good person. Within normative ethics, we have 3 main moral theories. Of course, there's more, and all of these theories have lots of variations, so we're just going to be sticking with like the broad main definitions for the purposes of this video. But those moral theories are deontology, consequentialism/utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. And I believe that each of these 3 moral theories falls in alignment with one of the 3 good alignments on the alignment chart. Starting with the alignment of lawful good, we have deontology or rule-based ethics. Deontology says that an action is good if and only if it adheres to a strict set of morally right rules. It doesn't care what the consequences of the action you take are, only that you are acting in accordance with your moral laws when you made that action. In D&D, the laws, of course, are going to be based on our principal definition of good that we have used. So you could come up with some ethical laws such as, do not murder or bring harm, directly or indirectly, to another sentient creature. Do not steal, for stealing inherently harms a victim whether they are aware of it or not. Do not lie, because lying compromises the dignity of both you and the victim of your deceit. Now those are some pretty strict moral rules and won't work in D&D, purely because D&D is a combat-based game and those rules pretty much exclude you from a lot of combat and roleplay situations. You just won't be able to play the game, basically. Now I also want to make clear the distinction between lawful good and lawful neutral characters, because they both adhere to a strict set of rules, but a lawful neutral character doesn't care if those rules are good or evil. Let's say that in a specific city it was legal to murder elves. A lawful neutral character wouldn't have any qualms with that law because, hey, it's the law, that is just and right in and of itself. But a lawful good character would look at that law and say, hang on, why is it okay to kill elves? That's not respecting the elves' life, their dignity, and that's not an altruistic goal. And because it's not a just law, the lawful good character can choose to disobey it. In our world, the most famous deontological philosopher is Immanuel Kant, who constructed a series of rules known as his categorical imperative. Using his categorical imperative and its formulations, Kant argued that we could determine, using nothing but our logic and reason, what is morally good and evil without an appeal to a higher power or objective ideal. But guess what, Kant, you convoluted piece of shit? We do have an objective ideal of good and evil. So get fucked! But seriously though, while Kant's categorical imperative and its formulations are really complicated and definitely not something we're going to go into here, the arguments levied against him and his theory can easily be applied to any deontological theory, and thus his rebuttals can also help us when we are dealing with the issues with deontology. Not to mention that in our conception of a lawful good character and what is lawful good, normally we include ideas such as don't lie and don't steal, which aren't directly involved with our principal definitions of good, but nonetheless, we kind of all just assume is a good thing to do, and Kant agrees. So for our purposes here, we're going to be including ideals such as those in our conception of lawful good, even though I'm not going to distinctly make an argument for it because Kant did that, and I'm going to leave some resources either like in the description down below or maybe a link to a video up here or something if you want Kant's arguments for why those things should be included. Paladins are, as I'm sure you've guessed, the best example of deontological morality in Dungeons & Dragons. They have strict tenets which they have to obey, and breaking those tenets results in the loss of their power and their class, essentially. Not all paladins obey a lawful good ideal, especially not in 5th edition. Oath of Vengeance. But the Oath of Devotion is pretty much the pinnacle of what a lawful good character is and fits the typical archetype stereotype, the idea of what people think of when they think of a paladin. So looking at their tenets, that's kind of a good idea of a kind of moral code that a lawful good character would use. And if you've ever played with a paladin or heard of anyone playing with a paladin, then you know where I'm going with this. The issue with deontology is that it is absolute. Your laws cannot be broken under any circumstances because they are what make you moral. And this can cause issues in play. Say for example, you and your party were just chilling, bros, hanging out in your magnificent mansion inside that city that hates elves. And then you discover that you've got an elf fugitive hiding in your kitchen. Seconds after you realize that, you hear a knock on the door. And it's the authorities, the town guard, and they are asking you, hey, have you seen an elf? We need to eliminate them. What do you do? Unlucky for the elf, if it is the lawful good paladin that opens the door, then he is morally obligated to tell the truth, even though he knows that the elf is going to die by telling the truth. He cannot lie, even to save the elf's life. And that is the issue with deontology, because that seems wrong, right? Because the fact is that even though the law is unjust and the paladin is morally justified in breaking that specific law that says you can't murder elves, that doesn't give him grounds to break his rule that says you cannot lie.
This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors.
Kant defends this position by saying that by telling the truth, you are ensuring your own moral integrity. You are acting morally. Any actions that the town guard takes is their own burden to bear, not yours. You did the right thing by not lying. And that is where paladins and lawful good characters come into conflict with the rest of the party, because they need to be unflinching with their moral code. And the rest of the party isn't so much. The rest of the party is going to want to try and save the elf more than likely. Chaotic, blasphemous heathen! The key to playing a lawful good character is acknowledging that your laws don't apply to other people. Your party can act in whatever way they want as long as you are acting morally. You need to let your party be the chaotic shits they are. If obeying stuffy moral rules isn't for you, it's cramping your vibe, just not what you're about, can't even, then allow me to present to you consequentialism. Consequentialism, as the name suggests, states that an action is good or evil if it creates good or evil consequences. It doesn't matter what the intention behind the action was, it purely looks at the outcome and how much goodness or evilness it created. The cold hard facts of the result of your actions are what matters. The most popular form of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which states that an action is good if and only if it creates the most amount of utility in the world. This moral theory was originally created by a philosopher by the name of Jeremy Bentham.
Jeremy Bearimy.
And Bentham said that it was actually pleasure that needed to be maximized in the world. My kind of man. But then the philosopher John Stuart Mill took Bentham's ideas and turned them into the form of utilitarianism that we know today, which is all about utility. Mill's utility does have its own specific definition, but for our purposes here, we can just treat the utilitarian doctrine as in relation to life and happiness. Act in a way that would maximize the amount of happiness and minimize the amount of harm in the world. On the alignment chart, I would argue that utilitarianism is a chaotic good moral theory, and that's because the chaotic good alignment is all about individual freedom, personal choice, and altruism. And utilitarianism follows those goals, providing you a framework by which you can exercise your own independent individual freedom. Applying utilitarianism to the example before, of course the utilitarian would say, lie to the guard, you're protecting a life, and by that life continuing to exist, you are increasing the amount of happiness and good in the world. Likewise, killing the king is justified because he is hoarding wealth and letting his citizens starve. And killing the wizard is justified because the wizard is making arcane weapons that could harm thousands, even though he's doing it under the threat of duress and out of love for his family. And then poisoning the water supply of an entire army is justified because you're stopping the bloodshed of that army fighting another army. You're helping people, you're maximizing happiness. Utilitarianism can be used to justify pretty much everything, as long as you are maximizing happiness with your outcome. Which, you know, is pretty convenient for D&D because you are often going to be doing a lot of fairly evil shit during an adventure.
Just want to double check. How do ethical philosophers feel about murder?
It's frowned upon.
Okay, what if the reason you want to murder someone is to make your life easier? That's okay, right?
However, utilitarianism also has its problems. Namely, some people just believe it provides wrong answers to the question of morality. If you kill 10,000 people in order to save 10,010, then are you really doing the good thing? Technically, yes, you maximized happiness, but like, you killed 10,000 people. Any moral theory that can be used to justify war and slavery and such atrocities as they can't be a good moral theory. And it has been, in our world, used to justify such things. Another counter-argument says that you can't accurately predict what the outcome or consequences of any given situation are going to be. You could be trying to cause good, but instead cause enormous harm. So let's say that you and your party entered into a village and you saw that there were some demon cultists there. And so you thought, hey, they're demon cultists. We don't want them causing any trouble. We're gonna kill them. But among those cultists were the only 2 to 3 doctors that the town had. And so now the town is left without any medicine. Dozens of people die of preventable diseases the doctors could have saved. So in the end, you killed more people and created less happiness by doing what you thought was right. In situations such as these, the lawful good deontologist is protected by their moral rules. They acted in accordance with them, and therefore they are moral. But you, the chaotic good utilitarian, have to live with the unintended consequences of your actions. Neutral good has a bit of a habit of becoming the default alignment. You're looking at your character and you're like, look, I want my character to be a good person, but at the same time, I don't want them to be particularly chaotic. Like, they're going to, you know, respect the laws of the town and everything. At the same time, like, if there's an unjust law, they're going to not obey it, which means they can't be lawful. So look, I'm just gonna put neutral good and I'm just, you know, I'm just a good person. Neutral good is a bit of a weird one because it's not hampered by law and chaos. All we've really got to work with is our principal definition of good. And our principal definition of good doesn't tell us how to act in and of itself, which is, you know, the prerequisite for a moral theory. But what if it wasn't? What if we could take our principal definition of good and extrapolate our moral theory using just that? That is the essence of Aristotle's virtue ethics. He argued that instead of trying to figure out whether an action is good or evil, you instead needed to figure out what a good person is and what virtues they possess. Then you work backwards from there to ask yourself, what would a good person, someone who obeys these virtues, do in this situation?
It's like who died and left Aristotle in charge of ethics?
Plato.
Aristotle said that virtues were the midpoint between two vices. For example, courage is the midpoint between cowardice and recklessness. Aristotle says that we all kind of intuitively know what a good person is just by being a part of a society, and that we should emulate that idea of a good person. You may not always get it right, but the point is that you are trying and that you continually adapt your actions to try and meet the virtues of a good person. And then over time, Aristotle says, you will become a better and more virtuous moral agent, constantly improving yourself and improving the lives of those around you. In the same way that virtues are the midpoint between two vices, I believe that virtue ethics is the midpoint between deontology and consequentialism. It gives you the freedom to act in whatever way you see fit, so long as you are striving towards achieving your virtues, but at the same time, it does ask you to behave in a certain consistent way in accordance with those virtues. It recognizes you as a person, and it's why I think it's the most human and realistic of any of the moral theories. Virtue ethics is the moral theory that sits you down and pats you on the back and says, you know what, buddy, you fucked up. But that's okay, because you know you fucked up, so we can use this as a learning experience to become better in the future. Thanks, virtue ethics. You know, that makes me feel a lot better. However, critics of virtue ethics point out that while it's all well and good to try and be a better person in the long run, and that virtue ethics is a really noble goal and all that, it still doesn't tell you how to be a good person. Two virtue ethicists could be faced with the same problem. Gilly. I let the cat in and now he's just sitting in a box in the corner of the room. What's wrong? You're not getting enough attention. No. Am I not giving you enough attention? That's probably destroying my mic right now. Like, two virtue ethicists could be faced with the same moral problem and choose polar opposite results, but still both be deemed as correct, depending on what virtues they were embodying in their lives at that time. Moreover, one virtue ethicist could be faced with a moral quandary at one point in their life, T1, and then 20 years on at time T2, be faced with the exact same moral problem and choose a different result. But despite the fact they picked different options at T1 and T2, both their choices could still be correct, because at time T2, they learnt from what happened with their choice at T1 and made a different decision, so they were acting more virtuously from the new information that they had. Other critics actually criticize virtue ethics for being selfish, because the goal of virtue ethics is the development of your own moral character, which is a quite self-centered goal, and really, a lot of people say morality should be about trying to minimize harm to other people and helping your community and those around you. And I just want to emphasize that just because these moral theories interact with the alignment system, it doesn't mean that by playing a neutral good character, you have to be a virtue ethicist, or by playing a chaotic good character, you need to be a utilitarian. The whole point of this is to just try and show you how the alignment chart can be grounded into real-world moral theories in order to try and give you a better understanding of the alignment. Whether or not you actually want to obey these alignments is another thing, but hopefully it's helped to, you know, give you a bit of foundation from which you can build your own interpretation of the alignments. But no discussion of moral theory or morality can be complete without a lawful good paladin, a neutral good monk, and a chaotic good bard walk into a dungeon. Inside the dungeon, they find themselves on a bridge overlooking a long hallway that then forks into two branching hallways. Down the left hallway, there is one unconscious hapless commoner who just happened to wander into the dungeon like hapless commoners do. But down the second right hallway, you have 5 unconscious hapless commoners. And then further up the hallway before the branch, there is a roaring infernal hellfire engine that is surging down it. Currently, it is going to run over the 5 hapless commoners on the right hallway, but the 3 intrepid adventurers are in front of a lever, and by pulling that lever, they can lower the gates to the right hallway and raise the gates to the left hallway, meaning that the Hellfire engine is only going to run over the 1 hapless commoner. What should the party do? the lawful good paladin is going to refuse to touch the lever, because by pulling it, he would be killing the one commoner, which he cannot do, it's against his tenets. The chaotic good bard will of course pull the lever, because by pulling it you are saving 5 lives, and the neutral good virtue ethicist monk will... So you have 3 good characters as per the universe's definition of good, who all want to do a different thing in this situation. That is the moral grey area of D&D. It's the negotiation between different passionate points of view, all trying to determine what is the right course of action. And that's why I think people are too hard on the alignment system. They believe that it disregards all moral nuance in favour of an objective definition of right and wrong, but it doesn't. It just provides a different view. You will never see passionate and engaging roleplay, like different characters with very strong moral beliefs arguing for what they think is right in an intense situation. It can really bring out the best, but also the worst in your players. The scenario I just laid out with the Hellfire Trolley and the commoners, that's a thought experiment. It's not a D&D scenario. If you were to put your players in a scenario like that, and those were the only 2 options, you're kind of a dick. Thought experiments provide a narrow set of options that lead to a limited set of results. That's because they are created to try and illustrate a point or a flaw or a goal that then they, almost by necessity, railroad the viewer into. In D&D, this robs the players of their all-important personal freedom. You're giving them only a limited set of options, often of which are no-win, and the players are just going to feel bad no matter which one they pick. And then saying, hey, you have to pick these no matter what. They can feel like you, the DM, are forcing them to be unwilling participants in some sick philosophical power fantasy where the only end result is that they have to feel shit. Oh, I think I just made a personal attack at myself there. If you're going to pose a moral quandary to your players, it can't be in the form of a thought experiment. They need to be able to engage with it on their terms. And yes, this is harder to do and you risk them totally missing the point, but it's a necessary sacrifice. Like, if your players are all cutthroat utilitarians, they're just like, okay, cool, we're happy to kill as many people as we need because we're the heroes, we are going to do the right thing, then maybe introduce some of these concepts through the NPCs in your world. Perhaps they get to a new city and that city is built on the backs of a huge slave labor force. And the king justifies this slave labor force by saying, well, if we didn't have this slave labor force, this city wouldn't exist. And more importantly, without it, we wouldn't have the resources and manpower in order to fight a continuous war against the omnipresent demons that are trying to overthrow the city. And if the demons win, then everyone dies. We are forcing this population of slaves to work because by doing so, we are saving the majority of the population of this city. And even the most cutthroat utilitarians will likely start to cringe a little and take issue with that interpretation of their ideology. That is not to say hardline ethical decision making, that is situations in D&D where there is a no-win outcome and players just have to make a hard moral choice that they don't agree with, don't have their place. They definitely do. But you need a campaign and a table that wants to engage with that kind of story. Trying to force that on a table of players who just want to play D&D to kill shit and be heroes isn't fair on them. Campaigns with these hard ethical decisions can be phenomenal and really create dramatic, potent moments for the characters and players at the table. But you need to make that clear from the outset, or at least clear that it is coming. For example, in my Descent into Avernus game, I can pull shit like this because it's Descent into Avernus, the players are in fucking hell. Of course I'm going to challenge them with things like this. Also, my players just kind of expect this shit from me at this point. The other problem with ethical decision making is that it creates player versus player tension. Your players and their characters are going to be arguing over this stuff. So you as the DM need to be able to diffuse that. You need to be able to control the scenario and put an end to it if things get too heated. It's all well and good to try and challenge the characters and challenge their players, but you need to make sure that everyone is having fun. And for a large part of it, philosophy isn't fun. It's kind of depressing, if we're being honest. Why am I even doing this video? This is D&D. Just fucking kill shit. Kill whatever you want. Hopefully this video has given you a bit more of an understanding about the alignment system and how you could potentially roleplay it in your characters and NPCs in the world, as well as of moral theories in general, and even moral philosophy. And hopefully you see how having an objective definition of good doesn't actually take away from moral decision making at the table, and how you can use the alignment system and still pose really interesting moral quandaries to your players. I find a lot of creativity comes out best when you've got some restrictions on your creativity. So if you need to think about it like that, think about the alignment system as a restriction on your storytelling and try and find creative solutions to that problem. I mean, I don't see it as a problem, but if that's what it takes. But I'll get more into the consequences of the alignment system within the world itself, and probably go into more examples of how the alignment system can be specifically used to create unique moral quandaries in my next video. I'm going to leave a whole bunch of resources in the description down below, so if you are interested in anything that I've talked about today in terms of the moral theories, head on down there. And I don't want a whole bunch of comments on this video about how I misinterpreted these moral theories or how I left out a lot of nuanced points, because like this video is like 30 minutes long or something. It's a video on D&D. I know that there's a lot more to these theories than what I've talked about in this video, but you need to draw the line somewhere when you're educating people on this stuff. And it is educating. This is basically just a 30-minute lecture on philosophy under the guise of a D&D video. You didn't think you were going to learn today, but you learned today. Actually, wait, no, yeah, do comment down there where I went wrong with all this kind of stuff, because it actually helps with the traction in YouTube's algorithm. So, and if you really like this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. Here at the Dungeon Inn, I do a lot of different kinds of videos. Really, I just throw stuff at a wall and see what fits, and really what I want to create. This is kind of a passion project for me. I don't just make videos as well, I actually publish content for the game, and be it at an amateur homebrew level. So check out us on the Dungeon Masters Guild as well. So if you're only subscribed to us here on YouTube, make sure to follow our Twitter mainly. I'm going to try and get our Facebook back up to date, because I'm terrible with social media. But at least follow us on Twitter, so that way you are getting all the updates, because you're actually only getting half of the content we produce. And if you really want to support us on Patreon, because our patrons get shout outs at the end of the videos. So shout out to Ashley Howard and Brick Bradford. Patreons get access to scripts and playtest material before the actual video comes out, as well as behind the scenes and blooper footage, and maybe even exclusive videos just for them. And I think that's about it. So I'm the Innkeeper, and I hope you enjoyed your stay here at the Dungeon Inn.